At 11:56 p.m., 4 minutes before Nathaniel Brooks intended to destroy his former wife, in front of half of Manhattan, a bartender handed him a cocktail napkin containing 6 words written in unfamiliar handwriting. "Ask Malcolm who changed her signature." Nathaniel read the sentence twice, while photographers called his name from beneath the chandeliers, then folded the napkin into his palm, without allowing his expression to move. Across the Grand Marston Ballroom, Malcolm Reed stood beside the stage, with the same composed posture he had maintained for 15 years, one hand resting near his phone, while staff members prepared Nathaniel's midnight announcement. Nothing about Malcolm suggested panic, yet Nathaniel noticed him watching Amara Johnson, instead of the investors gathered around the architectural model hidden behind velvet curtains. Amara had arrived alone, carrying a narrow cream envelope beneath her coat, and the sight of it created a pressure inside Nathaniel's chest that had nothing to do with their failed marriage. The gala had been advertised as a celebration of Brooks Capital's most profitable year, although the people closest to Nathaniel understood that the real purpose was the Marston Corridor redevelopment. At midnight, financing agreements would activate for a luxury district expected to add nearly $3 billion to the company's valuation, replacing 6 aging residential blocks with offices, hotels, galleries, and private apartments. Nathaniel had spent 18 months securing investors, permits, and political support, but 2 community objections had delayed approval, both connected to an organization Amara quietly advised. He had invited her because Malcolm insisted the objections were personal, a final attempt by a resentful former wife to attach herself to the company she had abandoned. Nathaniel had accepted that explanation because it fit the version of their divorce he had repeated for 5 years, and because questioning it would have required him to remember details he preferred to keep buried. Amara handed her coat to the attendant, keeping the envelope pressed against her ribs as if it contained something fragile rather than dangerous. She wore a black gown without sequins or theatrical elegance, and the simplicity unsettled people who expected a woman returning to her former husband's world to arrive dressed for revenge. Several guests recognized her from old headlines describing the Brooks divorce as a collision between ambition and emotional instability, although none of those stories mentioned that Amara had designed the community preservation model behind Brooks Capital's earliest civic projects. Her name had disappeared from company materials after the separation, then from public memory, while Nathaniel became a symbol of disciplined American success. Amara had never corrected the record, because she believed dignity survived without witnesses. But the Marston Corridor had changed the cost of remaining silent. Nathaniel approached her beside a marble column where the string quartet softened every conversation into something almost private. "You came," he said, keeping his voice neutral while searching her face for anger, regret, or any weakness that would justify what he planned to do. Amara glanced at the napkin corner still visible between his fingers before meeting his eyes. "Your invitation said the Marston announcement would include the original community partners," she replied. "I wanted to hear which version of the word original your company intended to use." Nathaniel felt the first sting of irritation, sharpened by the possibility that she already knew more than he did. "You have delayed this project twice without presenting a viable alternative," he said. "Tonight, the city finally moves forward." "The city is not moving forward if the people living there are pushed backward," Amara answered, her tone quiet enough to force him closer. Nathaniel reminded her that residents had received relocation offers above market value, but she asked whether he had personally read the survey showing how many could afford to return after construction. He had reviewed summaries, legal briefings, and financial projections, yet he could not remember seeing that specific survey. "Malcolm told you the relocation plan had community approval," she said, watching recognition pass through his face. "Did he also tell you the approval depended on a report carrying my signature?" Nathaniel's grip tightened around the folded napkin, and Amara noticed the movement without revealing whether she understood its meaning. Malcolm reached them before Nathaniel could answer, offering Amara the courteous smile he used when making resistance appear unreasonable. "The program begins in 2 minutes," he said, then turned toward Nathaniel as though she were no longer part of the conversation. "The board is seated, the lenders are connected remotely, and the city commissioner has confirmed attendance. Amara removed the cream envelope from beneath her arm, prompting Malcolm's eyes to shift toward it before returning immediately to Nathaniel. Ms. Johnson has misunderstood an outdated draft, he continued. Our legal department reviewed the matter, and there is no reason to disrupt an announcement affecting thousands of employees. Amara held the envelope between them, but did not open it. 3 weeks ago, someone from your office offered my foundation $2 million if I signed a statement confirming the filed report was accurate, she said. Nathaniel turned toward Malcolm, expecting denial, indignation, or at least surprise, yet his chief of staff paused a fraction too long. Malcolm recovered quickly and explained that attorneys often explored settlements when former consultants threatened damaging claims, although Nathaniel had never authorized such an offer. Who approved it? Nathaniel asked. Malcolm looked toward the stage as the orchestra completed its final movement. We can discuss administrative details after the announcement. The ballroom lights dimmed, and applause rose as the master of ceremonies welcomed Nathaniel toward the stage. Malcolm stepped closer, lowering his voice until only Nathaniel could hear. She wants you uncertain, because uncertainty is the only power she has left, he said. You invited her to close this chapter, so close it before she turns your hesitation into a public weakness. Nathaniel looked across the room at Amara, then at the napkin hidden inside his hand, recognizing that someone in the ballroom had risked everything to warn him about the man he trusted most. The countdown clock above the stage displayed 3 minutes until midnight, while the cream envelope remained unopened beneath Amara's fingers. Nathaniel walked toward the microphone, knowing that whatever he chose next would reveal whether he valued the truth more than the appearance of control. Nathaniel stepped into the spotlight as the velvet curtains opened behind him, revealing a glowing model of the future Marston district, complete with glass towers, rooftop gardens, performance halls, and luxury residences arranged where thousands of people currently lived. Investors applauded with the confidence of people who believed every moral question had already been resolved by someone paid to resolve it. Nathaniel began with the prepared language scrolling across the teleprompter, describing economic renewal, modern infrastructure, and forgotten neighborhoods finally receiving the investment they deserved. Yet the words sounded borrowed now, polished smooth enough to conceal every person affected by them. He glanced toward Malcolm near the stage stairs, then toward Amara, who stood without expression beside the residence table. The speech was supposed to end with Nathaniel announcing a respected nonprofit as Brooks Capital's community partner, followed by a carefully edited presentation portraying Amara's objections as personal and outdated. Malcolm had suggested the strategy after reporters discovered her connection to the opposition, arguing that Nathaniel should control the narrative before she did. Photographs from their marriage would appear beside images of neighborhood protests, allowing the audience to conclude that private bitterness had disguised itself as public concern. Nathaniel had approved the presentation without watching the final edit. Another decision made quickly because Malcolm promised every legal risk had been removed. Now, while the first image appeared behind him, he saw a photograph of Amara standing outside a condemned apartment building with Mrs. Evelyn Carter, a retired librarian whose relocation appeal had recently been denied. Progress attracts resistance, Nathaniel said, following the teleprompter, while his attention remained fixed on the photograph. Sometimes that resistance comes from fear, and sometimes it comes from people who confuse personal history with public responsibility. Several guests turned toward Amara, while Mrs. Carter shifted uncomfortably at her table. Nathaniel felt the room beginning to judge before any evidence had been heard, and he recognized the efficiency of Malcolm's design. The presentation did not need to accuse Amara directly, because the audience had already been trained by years of gossip to finish the accusation themselves. For the first time, Nathaniel wondered how often his company had created conclusions this way, arranging facts until the desired answer seemed inevitable. He stopped reading and asked the control booth to turn off the screen. The teleprompter operator hesitated, then obeyed as murmurs moved through the room. Malcolm stepped closer to the stage, but Nathaniel lifted one hand to prevent him from interrupting. "Amara," he said, his voice carrying farther than he intended, "you told me the filed impact report contains your signature." She remained still for a moment, aware that accepting the invitation might place every piece of evidence at risk. then walked toward the stage with the cream envelope held against her side. Nathaniel offered his hand as she climbed the steps, but she used the railing instead. Up close, he could see that her composure required effort, visible in the tension along her jaw and the careful rhythm of her breathing.
"Did you sign the report submitted to the state?"
he asked. Amara looked toward the city housing commissioner seated near the front before answering. "I signed an earlier version that preserved resident ownership, protected the library, and guaranteed the right to return at controlled rents," she said. "The version your company filed removed those provisions, changed the displacement estimates, and kept a scanned copy of my signature." Nathaniel asked why she had not contacted him directly, and a brief sadness moved through her expression. "I contacted you 9 times over 5 years, Nathaniel. Every answer came from Malcolm." Malcolm approached the microphone at the edge of the stage, maintaining the patient expression of an executive forced to manage an emotional misunderstanding. "The document Ms. Johnson references was an exploratory draft," he said. "Her signature confirmed participation in the consultation process, not approval of every later revision." Amara opened the envelope and removed a single page carrying handwritten notes in blue ink. She pointed to a paragraph stating that any material change required renewed consent from community representatives and the original design consultant. Beneath the paragraph were 2 signatures, hers and that of Daniel Cho, Brooks Capital's former compliance director. Nathaniel recognized Daniel's name but remembered him only as an employee dismissed after an internal fraud investigation. Daniel admitted altering company records, Nathaniel said, repeating what he had been told when approving the termination agreement. "Daniel discovered someone else had altered them," Amara replied. "He tried to meet with you before the board vote, and Malcolm blocked every request." Malcolm laughed once, not from amusement but disbelief. "Daniel Cho stole confidential files and attempted to extort this company after failing a performance review. Then ask Malcolm why Daniel's original personnel file was deleted 2 days after he requested federal whistleblower protection." The commissioner rose from her table, asking whether Amara possessed evidence beyond an unsigned allegation. Before Amara could respond, Mrs. Carter stood beside the residence and lifted a small digital recorder above her shoulder. Her hand trembled, but her voice did not. "I have evidence," she said. "Mr. Reed came to my apartment 6 months ago and told me the city would condemn our building whether we accepted the offer or not." Malcolm's expression tightened as reporters turned toward her. Mrs. Carter explained that she recorded the conversation because her late husband had taught her never to sign away a home after someone refused to put a promise in writing. Nathaniel looked toward Malcolm, who immediately argued that outreach teams sometimes used blunt language when residents misunderstood legally approved timelines. Mrs. Carter pressed the recorder's button, and Malcolm's voice filled the ballroom with quiet clarity. He could be heard telling her that Nathaniel wanted the neighborhood cleared before financing closed, followed by a statement that no court would delay a project supported by people powerful enough to outlast her savings. The recording ended with Malcolm offering to increase her payment if she persuaded other tenants to stop contacting Amara. Nathaniel felt every face in the room turn toward him, because Malcolm had used his name as both authority and threat. The countdown clock reached 90 seconds while the commissioner ordered security to prevent anyone from leaving. Malcolm removed his phone, checked a message, and displayed the screen toward Nathaniel. "If you stop the closing now, the lenders trigger the default clause," he said quietly. "Brooks Capital loses access to its credit lines before markets open, payroll freezes, and 11,000 employees become collateral damage." Amara watched Nathaniel absorb the information, then placed the cream envelope on the podium without pushing it toward him. "That is not the worst thing Malcolm hid from you," she said. "The worst thing is why he needed this project to close tonight." Nathaniel opened the envelope as investigators moved toward Malcolm, but the documents inside did not resemble the evidence he expected. The first page contained a list of property purchases made through shell companies during the 18 months before Brooks Capital announced the Marston project. Several buildings had been acquired at distressed prices after code violations, insurance cancellations, and emergency repair orders forced owners to sell. The purchasing entities appeared unrelated until a final chart connected them to a private trust controlled by Malcolm's brother-in-law. If Brooks Capital completed the redevelopment, The trust would sell those properties into the project at nearly 6 times their original value. Malcolm studied Nathaniel's face and understood immediately which records Amara had obtained. Those acquisitions were legal, he said. Outside investors purchase property around major developments all the time, and I disclosed my family relationship to counsel. Nathaniel turned toward the company's general counsel, who looked down at the table rather than answer. Amara explained that the disclosure had been filed 12 days earlier, long after the land purchases occurred, and only after Daniel Cho's attorney petitioned to release archived records. Malcolm had not created the Marston Project solely to advance Brooks' capital. He had used Nathaniel's reputation, political relationships, and obsession with speed to enrich himself through transactions hidden inside the larger deal. "You built the default clause," Nathaniel said, finally understanding why the financing agreement made withdrawal nearly impossible. Malcolm's expression hardened, but something wounded entered his voice. "I built the company you kept promising investors," he replied. "You wanted growth without delay, loyalty without argument, and clean answers from problems that were never clean." Nathaniel accused him of fraud, yet Malcolm did not retreat. "I protected you from every ugly choice," he said. "You collected the awards while I handled the officials, the holdouts, the lawsuits, and the employees who discovered conscience at inconvenient times." The accusation landed because it contained enough truth to resist easy dismissal. Nathaniel remembered board meetings where he rewarded Malcolm for eliminating delays, praising solutions without asking what had been sacrificed to create them. He remembered joking that he never wanted to hear the words impossible or complicated inside his office, believing he was encouraging discipline rather than fear. Amara had once warned him that people stopped telling powerful men the truth long before those men realized they had become dangerous. He had called her dramatic, then allowed Malcolm to turn that blindness into an operating system. Nathaniel had not ordered the crimes revealed tonight, but he had trained everyone around him to understand which results he valued more than the methods used to achieve them. The housing commissioner requested the original electronic report, and the general counsel admitted that its revision history had been wiped during a server migration. Malcolm seized upon the uncertainty, insisting Amara's documents could not prove who altered the signature or whether Nathaniel's office knew. Then Lena Ortiz entered through the ballroom doors, carrying a hard case secured with 2 locks. She had represented Daniel Cho since his dismissal, and her arrival had been delayed because a federal judge issued the disclosure order only 20 minutes earlier. Inside the case rested an encrypted drive containing Daniel's archived emails, server logs, and a recording from his final meeting with Malcolm. Lena played only 30 seconds before the commissioner stopped her. Daniel's voice could be heard refusing to certify the revised impact report, followed by Malcolm warning that Nathaniel would consider the refusal a betrayal during the company's most important acquisition. Daniel asked to speak with Nathaniel directly, and Malcolm answered that Nathaniel did not pay senior executives to bring him moral confusion. The recording ended with Malcolm saying he would fix the document and Daniel's career before the week was over. Nobody in the ballroom moved after the audio stopped, because the threat sounded less like an impulsive mistake than an established habit. Malcolm looked toward Nathaniel with an expression that was no longer defensive. "You think this makes you innocent?" he asked. "Daniel approached you in the elevator after the board meeting, and he told you the report was wrong." Nathaniel searched his memory, finding only fragments of a crowded afternoon 5 years earlier. Daniel had stepped into the elevator carrying a folder, spoken quickly about displacement numbers, and asked for 10 minutes before the vote. Nathaniel had looked toward Malcolm and said, "Why is this reaching me now?" Malcolm promised to handle it, and Nathaniel walked away without opening the folder. Amara saw the memory return in his face and understood that Malcolm had saved the most damaging truth for the moment when Nathaniel tried to separate himself from the wrongdoing. "You did hear him?" she said. "Not as an accusation, but as confirmation." Nathaniel nodded once, unable to defend a decision he had barely considered important at the time. Daniel's warning had not been hidden from him. It had been presented in a form he found inconvenient. That distinction destroyed the comforting belief that one dishonest advisor had corrupted an otherwise responsible leader. The countdown reached 40 seconds as the company's board surrounded Nathaniel with conflicting demands. One director urged him to proceed, arguing that the evidence remained untested and that stopping the closing would destroy the company before any court established wrongdoing. Another warned that continuing after hearing the recording could expose every executive to criminal conspiracy charges. Malcolm reminded Nathaniel that thousands of employees, pension funds, and contractors depended on Brooks Capital's survival. Amara said nothing, refusing to become the moral voice Nathaniel could later blame for choosing between strangers' homes and his own empire. With 20 seconds remaining, Charles Whitmore entered quietly through a side door, accompanied by 3 members of his foundation's board. He did not carry an award, a rescue package, or any promise designed to spare Nathaniel from consequences. Whitmore explained that his foundation had spent 11 months evaluating Amara's original preservation plan and could finance the neighborhood only if Brooks Capital withdrew from the acquisition before midnight. The foundation would not cover the company's losses, protect its executives, or purchase silence from displaced residents. Nathaniel would have to surrender the Marston properties at cost, accept independent oversight, and publicly clear Daniel Cho without knowing whether Brooks Capital survived the morning. Nathaniel reached the microphone with 8 seconds remaining, while every instinct that had built his career urged him to postpone, negotiate, or find language capable of preserving both choices. He looked toward the residents who had been invited to witness the announcement of their own displacement, then toward employees and investors whose futures might collapse because of decisions they never made. There was no clean answer, and for the first time he understood that leadership did not become moral only when morality was inexpensive. Brooks Capital is withdrawing from the Marston Corridor acquisition, he said as the clock crossed midnight. We will preserve every record, cooperate with every investigation, and transfer our property interests into an independently governed community trust at their original cost. The ballroom erupted into questions, protests, and urgent phone calls as financial networks reported the withdrawal within seconds. Nathaniel's board chair demanded that he retract the statement before lenders treated it as formal notice. But Nathaniel asked the general counsel whether the microphone announcement satisfied the contractual withdrawal requirement. She confirmed that it did, then admitted the default provisions would activate before markets opened. Malcolm laughed softly, while investigators collected his devices. You finally made a moral decision, he said, and you waited until it could destroy everyone around you. Nathaniel stepped down from the stage and approached Malcolm without anger, because anger would have allowed him to ignore the part of the accusation that remained true. You used my failures to excuse your choices, he said. I used your choices to avoid seeing my failures. Malcolm stared at him with an exhaustion Nathaniel had never noticed before, then revealed that his father had lost their family home during a redevelopment project 30 years earlier. He had joined Brooks Capital believing wealth and control could prevent anyone from making him powerless again. Somewhere along the way, he began treating vulnerable people as obstacles because he could no longer tolerate seeing himself among them. The confession did not erase what Malcolm had done, but it transformed him from a convenient monster into a man who had built cruelty around an old fear. Amara listened without offering forgiveness, recognizing the familiar danger of pain becoming permission. Malcolm had once understood displacement personally, then used that understanding to identify exactly where residents would break under pressure. The tragedy was not that he lacked empathy, it was that he had converted empathy into leverage. Investigators led him away while Nathaniel watched the ballroom doors close behind the person who had protected, manipulated, and understood him better than anyone else in the company. Charles Whitmore asked the Marston residents to move into a private conference room, explaining that no financing would proceed until they reviewed every term. Mrs. Carter insisted Nathaniel attend because Brooks Capital still controlled properties essential to the preservation plan. You do not get to disappear after making the announcement, she told him. The cameras can leave, but the paperwork stays. Nathaniel followed the residents beneath fluorescent lights into a room without champagne, music, or applause, where Amara unfolded the original neighborhood design across a long table. The plan preserved existing apartment buildings, restored the library, added a health clinic, and created new housing controlled by a resident ownership trust. It generated lower immediate returns than Nathaniel's luxury district, But the financial model remained stable over several decades because commercial revenue supported affordable rents. Nathaniel recognized courtyards, classrooms, and public gardens from sketches Amara had drawn during the early years of their marriage. He also recognized red marks showing revisions made after conversations with residents, evidence that the design had changed because other people were allowed to challenge its creator. His own architectural model looked impressive, because nobody affected by it had possessed enough power to say no. A young electrician named Marcus Hill questioned Amara's local hiring proposal, explaining that previous nonprofit projects promised training programs while awarding skilled contracts to outside firms. Amara did not defend the plan or cite her credentials. She asked Marcus which unions, schools, and apprenticeship groups residents trusted, then rewrote the employment targets while he spoke. Nathaniel watched her authority increase through correction rather than diminish because of it. He had spent years believing leadership required the strongest answer in the room, while Amara had built trust by making room for answers she did not possess. During a short recess, Nathaniel found her beside a window overlooking snow-covered Fifth Avenue. He asked why she had not brought the evidence to him before the gala, and anger finally entered her expression. "I sent letters, requested meetings, and asked mutual friends to reach you," she said. "Malcolm blocked me because you built a life where anyone could be removed by calling them emotional." Nathaniel tried to explain that he believed she wanted influence over Brooks Capital because of their past, but Amara shook her head. "I wanted the company to stop using our past while pretending I had never helped create it." He apologized for the stolen work, the false narrative surrounding their divorce, and the years he allowed silence to function as proof against her. Amara listened without softening, because regret spoken after exposure could still be another attempt to control the outcome. "An apology is not restoration," she said. "Restoration is what you do when nobody promises to forgive you." Nathaniel returned to the conference table and signed an irrevocable instruction transferring every Marston property into temporary trust, knowing his board would remove him before noon. Across the table, Amara watched him surrender the first thing he had ever valued without assurance that losing it would earn him anything in return. By dawn, the gala had become the largest corporate scandal in the country, while Nathaniel remained in the conference room reviewing land records with residents who had once been reduced to relocation statistics. His phone vibrated continuously with warnings from attorneys, board members, lenders, and political allies, but he answered only questions connected to preserving documents and protecting employees who cooperated with investigators. Each signature reduced his authority while increasing the number of people capable of challenging his decisions. The sensation felt frightening, yet strangely honest, because control had stopped disguising itself as responsibility. Daniel Cho joined the meeting through a secure video call shortly after 6 o'clock, speaking from a modest kitchen in Oregon, where he had rebuilt his career under another name. Nathaniel apologized without blaming Malcolm, the legal department, or the culture of urgency surrounding the Marston project. Daniel listened, then asked whether Nathaniel remembered the elevator conversation. Nathaniel described the moment exactly as it had returned to him, including his impatience and the way he passed Daniel's folder to Malcolm without opening it. "I did not understand what you were telling me," Nathaniel said. Daniel's expression remained calm. "You understood that I was asking you to stop. You decided the reason could wait." Nathaniel accepted the distinction, because denying it would preserve the same blindness that had destroyed Daniel's reputation. He asked what Daniel needed from Brooks Capital, expecting compensation large enough to become tomorrow's headline. Daniel requested a corrected employment record, reimbursement of legal expenses, protection for every cooperating employee, and a public archive of the Marston investigation. "People should not need my courage to prove what happened again," he said. Nathaniel agreed, then signed the instructions before the board could remove his authority. Amara watched the exchange from across the table and understood that Nathaniel had finally begun listening without searching for a way to remain innocent. During their marriage, he often apologized for her feelings while defending the choices that caused them, turning every conversation into a negotiation over whether she had interpreted reality correctly. Now he allowed Daniel's version to remain complete even when it wounded him. The change did not restore trust, but it created the first condition under which trust might someday exist in another form. Amara had forgiven him years earlier for her own survival, yet forgiveness had never meant returning access to the person who caused the damage. At noon, Brooks Capital's board removed Nathaniel as chief executive after an emergency vote lasting 17 minutes. He retained shares, but lost operational authority, and regulators temporarily barred him from holding executive positions while the investigation continued. Several directors claimed ignorance despite approving agreements designed to make withdrawal impossible, while commentators debated whether Nathaniel was a courageous reformer or a disgraced founder protecting himself after exposure. He rejected both descriptions. Cooperation after discovery did not transform negligence into heroism, and one costly decision could not repay years of people being ignored. Malcolm eventually pleaded guilty to fraud, evidence tampering, and unlawful financial self-dealing, receiving a sentence reduced by his cooperation against 2 attorneys and a city official. During a private statement to the court, he apologized to the residents but refused to ask Nathaniel for forgiveness. He explained that he had spent his life believing humiliation could be prevented only by becoming too powerful to humiliate. When that power finally arrived, he protected it by repeating the harm he once feared. Mrs. Carter attended the hearing and later told reporters that understanding someone's wound did not require surrendering justice to it. 6 months after the gala, the Marston Community Trust formally acquired the contested properties through a partnership among residents, municipal funds, and the Whitmore Foundation. Amara accepted the role of executive director only after the charter granted neighborhood representatives equal voting authority with institutional donors. Daniel joined the Independent Compliance Board, Marcus led the local apprenticeship council, and Mrs. Carter received permanent authority over the Library Restoration Committee. Nathaniel transferred his remaining land interests at cost, losing millions his attorneys argued he could legally keep. He began volunteering with the apprenticeship program after Marcus refused his first offer to serve as an advisor. "You know boardrooms," Marcus told him. "These people need transportation, childcare, safety certification, and somebody who answers the phone when paperwork disappears." Nathaniel accepted an administrative desk in a temporary construction trailer, organizing schedules and calling suppliers without photographers or a title. When a trainee accused him of using the program to repair his reputation, Nathaniel resisted the old instinct to explain himself. "You may be right," he said. "The only evidence I can offer is whether I keep showing up after people stop watching." Amara observed his work from a distance, while maintaining clear boundaries. Their conversations concerned permits, contracts, and neighborhood meetings, never nostalgia disguised as reconciliation. Nathaniel occasionally saw the woman he had loved in the way she leaned over blueprints or laughed with volunteers, but he understood that recognition did not create entitlement. She had built a life larger than the chapter they shared, and his redemption could not depend on being invited back into it. His task was simpler and more difficult: to become trustworthy without demanding that the person he harmed remain present to reward him. 2 years later, the first Marston Community Center opened where Nathaniel's luxury model had once placed a private members club. The restored library occupied the center of the building, surrounded by classrooms, a health clinic, small businesses, and apartments owned partly by residents through the community trust. Children carried paper flags across the courtyard, while older tenants compared the new brickwork with photographs of the neighborhood before construction began. The project had survived financing disputes, political pressure, material shortages, and disagreements fierce enough to prove that resident control was more than ceremonial language. Amara stood near the entrance greeting families rather than donors, wearing a blue dress and the same diamond earrings she had worn to the gala. She had received national recognition for the Marston model, but every award remained inside her office because public praise could easily recreate the distance the project was designed to remove. Charles Whitmore attended without announcing a donation, while Daniel Cho appeared on a courtyard screen from Oregon to receive an ethics award created in his name. Marcus's first apprenticeship class stood near the stage, including several former tenants who now worked on projects across the city. Nathaniel arrived alone and remained near the back until Mrs. Carter called him forward to help uncover the dedication plaque. The federal investigation had concluded that he never ordered the falsification, although regulators found his negligent oversight contributed directly to the misconduct. Brooks Capital survived as a smaller company under new leadership, and Nathaniel used part of his remaining wealth to establish an institute teaching founders how organizational culture punished unwelcome information. The program attracted little attention compared with his former career, but employees from several major companies had already used its anonymous reporting model to expose abuses before they became scandals. Mrs. Carter opened the ceremony by refusing the simple story reporters expected. Amara did not save this neighborhood alone, and Nathaniel did not repair it alone, she said. People saved it by keeping records, attending meetings, asking ugly questions, and refusing to believe power was the same thing as truth. She thanked Daniel for risking his career, Marcus for challenging weak promises, and residents who rejected relocation offers even when their savings began disappearing. Then she thanked Nathaniel for remaining, after apologies stopped earning applause. Charles Whitmore announced that the Marston model would expand into 4 additional cities through a $1.8 billion initiative governed by local ownership boards. The crowd celebrated, but Amara redirected attention toward the residents seated around the courtyard. "Buildings do not rescue communities," she said. "People protect communities when they are allowed to shape what comes next." She acknowledged mistakes made during construction, including an early hiring plan that Marcus forced her to rewrite, and accessibility problems Mrs. Carter identified before final inspection. Her honesty made the achievement feel more credible because the project had not succeeded through perfection. It had succeeded because correction remained possible. After the ceremony, Nathaniel found Amara beside the library entrance while children placed letters inside a time capsule. He told her the courtyard looked almost exactly like a sketch she had drawn in their first apartment. "Not exactly," she replied, pointing toward shaded seating, added after residents complained the original design ignored summer heat. "It became better when other people were allowed to change it." Nathaniel smiled because the sentence described more than architecture. He thanked her for allowing him to contribute, and Amara corrected him without cruelty. "I did not allow you to become accountable," she said. "You chose accountability after it stopped benefiting you." Nathaniel admitted that part of him once believed enough good decisions might restore their relationship. Amara looked through the library windows toward Mrs. Carter helping a child choose his first book. "Some things should not be restored," she said. "They should become foundations for something healthier." Nathaniel told her he had begun seeing Rebecca Lane, a public school principal who interrupted him whenever his explanations became too polished. Amara laughed and said that sounded useful, then admitted she had built a life with Samuel Price, an architect who joined the Marston project during its second year. Nathaniel felt the final shape of what he had lost, but the pain carried no bitterness. Her happiness did not diminish his change, and his change did not require her return. When the time capsule was ready, Mrs. Carter invited Nathaniel and Amara to place the final 2 letters inside. Nathaniel wrote that leadership should be measured by how safely the least powerful person could deliver unwelcome truth. Amara promised future residents that no decision about their neighborhood would ever again be considered complete until the people living there had spoken. Neither signed a title beneath their name. The capsule was sealed below the library steps, while children ran across the courtyard, unaware of how close arrogance had once come to erasing their homes. Nathaniel watched Amara return to Samuel and the residents, then understood that redemption was not recovering the life he had lost. Redemption was becoming someone who would no longer destroy the same thing twice, even when nobody he loved remained to witness the difference.